The Holocaust, a unique event in the 20th century, evolved slowly between 1933 and 1945, starting with discrimination, followed by the separations of Jews from their communities to be persecuted, to which they were treated as less than human beings and unfortunately murdered. In this short documentary, we will be investigating three key psychological aspects that could be used to explain the Holocaust and the reasons behind it. Looking back at Hitler's childhood, it's been said that this could be down to his character's flaws in his adulthood. It's been known that abusive parents tend to produce children who are also cruel and abusive. The way children were reared when Hitler was growing up was through a lot of beating. This explains Stalin and Hitler's suppressed fantasies, which led to their revenge and atrocities. According to Nazi criminals, their ability to be obedient is linked to their brutal upbringing. Born into a family of six, Hitler and his sister were the only children to survive. Following the death of his younger brother, Hitler was deeply affected, which could be seen through a change in his behaviour. He became detached and was known to be constantly fighting with his father until his untimely death in 1903. Hitler's interest in fine art led him to apply to the Academy of Fine Art. However, he failed to get in several times. He then joined the Bavarian army, however was unable to continue as he became temporarily blind by mustard gas. In 1923, Hitler attempted an uprising, however was unsuccessful, which landed him in imprisonment. For 9 months. When he got out, the Nazi Party was stronger than ever. He then became Chancellor in 1933. This was the beginning of Adolf Hitler's dictatorship, to which millions of people were killed: Jews, blacks, homosexuals, the mental and physical unable. Hitler's ruthless behavior has been dissected by many psychologists. Freud's psychodynamic perspective explains the root of his behavior to be psychosexual. Throughout his childhood, Hitler's love for his mother and anger towards his dad shows that he may have developed a sexual attraction towards his mother, therefore creating jealousy towards his father, which shows unresolved father-son conflict. Rudolf Binyon reviewed Hitler's behavioral characteristics and evaluated them with regards to psychoanalysis. He found that a rise in certain events in his life influenced his neurotic behavior. For example, his mother was diagnosed with breast cancer when he was 18. As he had a close relationship with his mother, this may have traumatized him. He came up with the shaky thesis. His reaction to important things in his life and the over-nurturing of his mother could suggest an incestual relationship, hence the close relationship with his mum and the jealousy towards his father.
We all know that the most well-known dictators in history are the ones who have made the most impact on the global society as we know it. Names such as Vladimir Lenin, Saddam Hussein, Joseph Stalin, and Adolf Hitler, to name but a few, have all made their mark in the history books for their outrageous strategies to obtain order among their public. When looking into Hitler's dictatorship, many people question both the positive and negatives about him as a person. The positives being how he managed to win the hearts of his followers, and the negatives being how he had such terrible visions of a new world and how he went about making his dream a reality. To be able to gain an insight into Hitler's Holocaust as a historic event, we must first look at dictators as a general umbrella term. It has been found that practically all dictators, both past and present, have a vast number of similar personality traits. These include pathological lying, emotionally shallow, poor early behavioural control, sadistic, excellent memories, and a lack of empathy. These are, to name only a small sample. These traits may seem bad for the majority of people, but in the eyes of psychologists and dictators alike, these are the mere building blocks that help an individual to convince people about their visions in a charming way. A good example of this in action was Hitler. He was adored by his followers, which gave him that extra shot of power over a nation. The traits mentioned can therefore be deemed as positive. However, a psychologist named Robert Hare created a psychopathology checklist which scored people out of a total of 40 points on their personality, depending on their answers that they give to a question. 40 points means 100% psychopathic. Many people in society would score 0 points, yet a handful would be borderlining on psychopathic, but not scoring a full 40 points. The personalities that appear on this checklist are consistent with that of the personality traits commonly found in dictators. This therefore means that we can classify dictators as psychopathic. However, in contrast to this approach, there has been evidence that two forms of a specific gene has been identified that has a direct link to having an above-average memory. But as a result of this gene also makes the individual so very anxious, even to a state of depression. This means that perhaps there is a genetic pattern to these behavioural traits and maybe not a psychological one. A psychologist named Walter Langer investigated Hitler's childhood upbringing to see if there was any explanation for his act of vile behaviour. Langer used the Freudian approach to investigate Hitler's past, as Freud himself believed that events that happened in early childhood were responsible for later adult behaviour. Hitler was the third eldest in a family of 6 children. He had 2 older sisters and 3 younger brothers. However, all of his 3 younger brothers died at a very young age. Hitler's father was a drunken, violent man who would beat young Adolf regularly. Langer stated that it would have therefore been very difficult for Hitler to identify a clear-cut process of adulthood that he could then use for his own development. This would have given him a distorted picture of the world around him and the people within it. Research then came to light that Hitler's father once left him for dead after a savage beating. Because of this, Langer then thought that Hitler would have been driven into the arms of his mother to seek the affection and comfort that he never got from his father. This, however, would have profounding psychological effects on the young. Hitler's mother had 3 miscarriages before she had Adolf. This gave Langer the impression that Hitler's mother would have then given Hitler a lot of her own attention and would cater for his every need to the point of almost spoiling him. This information then sparked the idea of the Oedipus complex onto the Hitler family, as Langer suggested that Adolf was driven to his mother by love and affection, but was terrified of his father's wrath if he was ever discovered. This could therefore explain the such strong love Hitler himself had for the Aryan race, yet such a strong hate for the Jewish religion. However, arguing against this, the Freudian concept that Langer used cannot be falsified. This therefore means that there cannot be a way of proving this theory to be true, because Freud was a psychologist specialising in the unconscious, and as we have no way of looking into the unconscious, we cannot provide any further evidence that this Freudian theory justifies why Hitler acted the way he did in the Second World War. In conclusion, the information discussed does supply us with a vast range of evidence to suggest that psychology can explain the Holocaust very well and rather accurately. However, I do believe that some theories, like that of the Freudian example, does not give us substantial proof that one theory on its own explains the components of such a magnificent death trap that is the Holocaust. An event as complex and as famous as this does need to be looked at in more depth. Only then can we draw any close conclusions to what Adolf Hitler was experiencing both in his past and at the present time.
One factor that drove the Holocaust was the Nazi soldiers that carried out many horrific acts that contributed to the devastation caused by the Holocaust. A main question to be asked is what drove the Nazis. Were they truly evil humans that carried out such ruthless acts, or ordinary men at the mercy of Hitler's rule? During the Nuremberg trials after the Holocaust, this very debate took place. The perception from the general public at the time was that only pathologically insane people could commit such atrocities. This led to Rudolf Hess, a high-ranking Nazi, pretending to be insane during the trials to prove incompetence and thus not be held accountable for his actions. During this time, it was necessary for Nazi behaviour to be investigated. Allied psychiatrists Douglas Kelly and Gustav Gilbert assessed Nazis standing on trial to either prove or disprove the Mad Nazi thesis.
What is your professional training?
I am a qualified psychologist. I'm also a diplomate of the American Board of Examiners in Professional Psychology.
What was your task at the Nuremberg jail?
To make psychological examinations of all of the defendants in order to be informed on their mental state in case any question of insanity arose, according to the technique known as participant observer, to find out the psychological cause of the greatest tragedy in human history.
Evidence for the Mad Nazi thesis first came from a physiological perspective. Robert Ley, leader of the German Labour Front, committed suicide during the trials. His post-mortem revealed a long-standing degenerative process in the frontal lobe of his brain. This was the first conclusive evidence that there was an abnormal neuropathological diagnosable condition for Nazi behaviour. Of the personality disorders, a DSM diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder is most applicable to perpetrators. A pattern of disregard for and violation of the wishes, rights, or feelings of others characterizes this disorder. Individuals showed little remorse for their actions, blaming the victims and minimizing the harmful consequences of their actions.
Did you submit them to psychological tests?
Yes, I administered intelligence tests and personality tests to all of them before the trial started to be sure that these would be valid, because it was of supreme importance to get to understand the Nazi mentality.
During investigations, Kelly and Gilbert both disagreed on whether or not they had proven the Mad Nazi thesis. Gilbert maintained that the Nazis had cultivated a deviant personality type that lacked empathy and conscience, describing them as the unfeeling mechanical executioners of orders for destruction, no matter how horrible. Kelly, however, did not believe the Nazis had a psychopathic personality. Instead, he likened their qualities to those found in successful businessmen and politicians. This was due to his strong belief in the validity of inkblot testing, which showed no signs of insanity in any of the defendants. Despite the general belief that the Nazis were insane, there was little evidence to support this notion once investigations began. Individuals were tested through psychological methods such as inkblot tests and IQ tests, which found no sign of insanity, and in fact most had above-average intelligence. Further evidence against their lack of psychopathy could be shown in early reports of reactions to their own actions. A wide range of perpetrator accounts revealed initial involvement in killing led to nightmares, anxiety attacks, and depression. These reactions aren't consistent with the idea that soldiers were pathologically evil or insane. They responded emotionally to their actions and regretted them. Accounts from survivors of concentration camps are consistent with the idea that individual soldiers were not evil. They were ordinary men who knew right from wrong. Famous survivor Primo Levi described them as made of the same cloth as we. They were average human beings, averagely intelligent, averagely wicked. Save the exceptions, they were not monsters. They had our faces. Similarly, a physician imprisoned in Auschwitz said, "I know of no SS man who could not claim to have saved someone's life. There were few sadists. Not more than 5 or 10% were pathological criminals in the clinical sense. The others were all perfectly normal men who knew the difference between right and wrong." The debate now was if these men were ordinary, with no underlying pathological disorders dictating their actions. Why did they commit such awful crimes?